Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Let's take a look at the headlines for the hour. The US-Iran ceasefire crumbles as fresh strikes rock the Middle East. The funeral of former Iranian leader Khamenei concludes amid uncertainty over US talks. And at least 11 people have died following multiple wildfires in Spain's southern region. A future peace between the US and Iran remains in doubt following an exchange in attacks from both sides in the Gulf region. The United Nations has warned the renewed violence could further destabilize the region. Here's more.
The United Nations is urging for restored calm between the US and Iran following a breakdown in their agreed ceasefire. The US said it struck around 90 military targets Wednesday night, including some near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran said at least 14 people were killed and 78 injured across 5 provinces. State media also reported strikes near the Bushehr nuclear power plant, although the United States has not commented on those claims. In response, Iran launched attacks targeting US military assets in Kuwait, Bahrain and Qatar. Iranian state-linked media later reported further strikes on sites in Kuwait, Jordan and Iraq. Iran's foreign ministry strongly condemned the latest US attacks, calling them a grave war crime, accusing Washington of dangerous actions. It also said bridges and a railway line linking Tehran to Mashhad, where the former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been buried, were damaged during the strikes. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over the renewed violence in and around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, warning that the latest escalation risks further destabilizing an already volatile region.
This tit-for-tat needs to stop, right? A return to diplomacy is urgently needed for the sake of stability in the region, for the sake of global stability. I mean, we keep talking about the impact that this conflict is having on the global economy, and I think all of the parties involved need to understand that the best way to end this conflict is a return to the negotiating table.
While the ceasefire appears to be broken, Pakistan's lead negotiator is working to bring both sides back to the table.
The remains of Iran's former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei and his members of his family have been laid to rest in the former leader's hometown of Mashhad. Turar Shiraliliu has more from the city.
The late Supreme Leader of Iran and 3 of his family members have finally been laid to rest. The burial took place early Friday after week-long state and public funeral processions in the capital Tehran, the city of Qom, and the Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala, home to the shrines of Shiite saints. The ceremony had been delayed for more than 4 months because of the Israeli-US war with Iran. Aside from serving as a political figurehead, Iran's late Supreme Leader was a Grand Ayatollah, a top religious status in Shia Islam for someone who reached the highest level of scholarship in Islamic law. Following the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Ayatollah Khamenei led Iran for about 4 decades, shaping its domestic and foreign policies longer than any other political figure of his generation. His massive funeral rituals were seen as a tribute to his legacy as well as a demonstration of post-war political resilience. Following his death, the leadership was passed to his son, Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. Because of the extensive funeral processions, Tehran and Washington postponed their technical level talks on implementing the ceasefire agreement that was signed last month. Now, the future of those talks remains in doubt following an exchange of attacks between the 2 sides in recent days. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has held phone calls with his counterparts from Oman, Pakistan and Qatar, as well as foreign ministers of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. He also talked on phone with Pakistan's army chief, who led the negotiations that led to an initial ceasefire, focusing on de-escalating the latest tensions and resuming talks between the US and Iran. Turar Shiraliliu from Mashhad for A News.
Ukraine has targeted Russia's oil infrastructure in fresh strikes as refinery disruptions add pressure to the country's domestic fuel market. Ukrainian drones struck an oil refinery in southern Russia overnight, reportedly causing a fire at the facility. The refinery processes around 138,000 barrels of oil per day and has been targeted several times during the war. The strike comes as several Russian regions face fuel shortages, rising prices and long queues at petrol stations. Moscow has temporarily banned diesel exports to redirect more supplies to the domestic market. Now, following the recent NATO summit in Ankara, Russia has described the commitments made by the alliance in support of Ukraine as irresponsible, while also accusing European states of what it describes as preparing for an armed conflict. Joining me now to discuss the reactions from the Kremlin is Douglas Davis, co-founder of the Ukrainian Alliance for Medical Exchange and Development from Chicago, United States. Douglas, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, only yesterday, we were discussing NATO's renewed support for Ukraine. Today, the Kremlin has dismissed those commitments as irresponsible and accused European governments of preparing for conflict with Russia. Was this inevitable from Russia? What's your assessment?
Of course. I mean, consider the source. You have a regime that has, in this ongoing conflict for the full-scale invasion for the past 4+ years, but going back to 2014, has failed to achieve its objectives and has been put in a position where the only way they can respond to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, now bringing the fight to the Russian homeland, is to attack civilians. Ukraine has shown remarkable innovation and ability to now strike deep within Russia, thousands of kilometers into Russia, and their only real response has been to attack back against civilians, to use terror as a weapon to try and force the Ukrainians to bend the knees, which will not happen. So, of course, this is a major setback, an incredible setback for Russia, because now the one thing that the Ukrainians have not been able to independently produce themselves are the defense, the interceptor systems, the PAC-3 systems that can truly counter the ballistic, the hypersonic missile attacks on their civilian structures. So this new partnership, industrial partnership between Ukraine, the United States, and the West, now potentially eliminates the one true weapon that Russia has left. Now, of course, they're going to respond. They're going to respond with escalatory rhetoric. We're already ready for that. That's nothing new. But this new partnership represents something truly profound and a true game changer, potentially, for this conflict.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Kremlin also criticized the US plan to let Ukraine build its own Patriot missiles. From Russia's view, why is this domestic production of advanced air defense so important?
It's so important because it potentially eliminates the one form of offense that Russia has that the Ukrainians have not been able to counter with their own homegrown defensive measures, and that's the attacks on civilian, principally civilian targets within Ukraine, using their ballistic and hypersonic missile systems. They have, of course, use those against Ukraine's electrical infrastructure, against their military-industrial complex. But if you look at the responses that they've had to the attacks on Moscow and to the deep strikes on Russia's oil refining capacity, they've principally been against civilian targets. So Russia's belief is that its greatest offensive capability against Ukraine has been essentially the use of terror.
Now, after the summit, Douglas, Trump was hopeful about peace. Yet Russia's stance immediately toughened. Is Moscow has no reason to negotiate now or yet a fair assessment, in your opinion?
Russia has never been a good faith negotiator, and they never will be a good faith negotiator. So I have no doubt that President Trump is sincere in his hopes to see peace, and to see the loss of civilian lives mitigated. However, negotiation with Russia has never been a possibility. It's why we've reframed the discussion, and there's been a bit of differences of opinion about here of calling Ukrainian triumphalism too early. But the reality is that Ukraine has not won this war, but Russia has lost this war, and specifically Vladimir Putin has lost this war. Vladimir Putin has backed himself into a corner where there's really no viable options left for him other than to saber rattle and to continue his terrorist attacks on Ukrainian civilians, and to hope that the West would have, stop paying attention. But that bet that he made at the outset of the full-scale invasion, that the Russian economy, the Russian war economy, the Russian meat grinder, the runway for that would outlast Western attention and Western support, has proven to be a very poor bet. And so the pathway to peace is to my mind not negotiations, because Russia will never be a good faith negotiator. The pathway to peace is for definitive justice and victory for Ukraine.
Russia often uses fighting and political messaging together. Are these latest statements meant to prepare everyone for future negotiations?
No, they're meant to, as with all things with Russia, it's a part of cognitive warfare campaigns by Russia to shape narratives in ways that generate as we talk about when we talk about Russian cognitive warfare, to reflexively control the response of the adversary. And so to either lull Westerners into believing that continued support of Ukraine will lead to dire consequences for Europe, for NATO, and or that it will lead to further escalations in Ukraine that would have unacceptable losses for Ukraine. But that's sort of the crux of the issues when you're dealing with Russia. Russia says one thing, their intent is always something else. If you respond in the way that they would like, then the carpet will be pulled out from under you later down the line. So the only way to deal with Russia is through strength and through doing what Ukrainians have done, which is showing that they will not bend the knee, and that they will bring the fight to Russia as they have, and that this war will end. I don't believe the war ends on the battlefield per se, because the battlefield momentum has shifted towards the Ukrainians, but it is still a highly costly battle. It is still a war of attrition. And the way that this ends, to my mind, is when the Russians have become fed up enough of Putin's folly, and that the Russians have not only experienced the pain, but they've experienced the embarrassment of what Vladimir Putin has done to their nation, ruining their economy, ruining any semblance of a global reputation as a superpower and as a responsible state actor. Russia has been rendered nothing more than a terrorist state, and quite frankly, a joke, a vassal state of China.
Douglas, thank you so much for joining us on the program. That's all we have time for. I appreciate your analysis today.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Germany has agreed to buy US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles and deploy them on its own territory, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced. Speaking in Parliament on Thursday, Merz said the agreement was reached with Washington during the NATO summit in Ankara. He added that the move would strengthen Germany's defences while Europe develops its own long-range missile systems. The plan had been uncertain after President Donald Trump announced a reduction in the US military presence in Germany. We'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. The race to lead Britain's Labour Party appears all but over, with Andy Burnham expected to secure the top job. He has also admitted the party got it wrong on Gaza and promised a tougher approach to Israel. Zainab Ferazadeh reports.
Andy Burnham is on the verge of becoming the UK's next Prime Minister after securing overwhelming support in the race to lead the Labour Party. He received the backing of 322 Labour MPs on the first day of nominations, but the magic number is 323 nominations, though he is just one shy of ruling out a leadership contest. However, several MPs who were unable to vote on Thursday say they intend to support him once they return to Parliament. As Burnham moves closer to replacing Keir Starmer, he has also sought to address one of the most sensitive issues facing the party in recent years, its response to the war in Gaza. Speaking during his leadership campaign, he apologized for Labour's initial handling of the conflict, saying the party got it wrong. He acknowledged that the party's position caused pain to many people, and his comments refer to Labour's stance at the beginning of the war under Starmer, who faced criticism in 2023 after saying Israel had the right to cut off power and water together. Starmer's office later clarified that he was referring to Israel's general right to self-defense under international law. Burnham said Labour learned from those mistakes and pointed to changes in the party's position since then. That includes support for recognizing a Palestinian state and sanctions against some Israeli ministers and settlers. Looking ahead, he said he wants the UK to put greater pressure on Israel to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, while continuing to support efforts towards a lasting peace. With no serious challenger expected to emerge, Burnham is now widely expected to become Labour leader and in turn the country's next Prime Minister. Zainab Ferazadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Attention's turning to France's 2027 presidential race after a major development involving one of the country's leading far-right political figures. Here's Anita Sharma with the latest.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Marine Le Pen is back in France's presidential race and back on top of the polls. Just days after an appeals court upheld her conviction for embezzling European Parliament funds, but dramatically shortening her ban from holding office, new surveys show the National Rally leader leading the field for France's 2027 presidential election. The three polls put Le Pen at around 36% in the first round, with projections showing she would narrowly defeat either former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe or centrist Gabriel Attal in a runoff. Hard left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon would lose by a wide margin to Le Pen. It's a remarkable turnaround for a politician whose presidential ambitions appeared to be in serious doubt just days ago. The election would be Le Pen's fourth bid for the French presidency after unsuccessful campaigns in 2012, 2017, and 2022. This time, however, President Emmanuel Macron cannot run again because of term limits, leaving France's political center without an incumbent standard-bearer. Le Pen has cast her legal battle as proof she's taking on what she calls the political establishment, telling supporters, "These trials, I believe, have strengthened us." Now, although free pending her final appeal, Le Pen could still end up serving a year under electronic monitoring wearing an ankle tag. However, her path to the Elysee will also depend on her long-standing partnership with party president Jordan Bardella. During the months when Le Pen faced the prospect of being barred from the race, he emerged as the party's potential presidential candidate. Now, the pair are campaigning together again, combining Le Pen's experience with Bardella's popularity among younger voters as the party seeks to broaden its appeal. Her hardline message remains very central. In a post on X, Le Pen stated that in 1 year, we will regain control over immigration and criminal policy. France's highest court is still expected to rule on Le Pen's final appeal before voters go to the polls, so a lot can happen before April. After surviving the biggest legal challenge of her career, Le Pen will now try to achieve what has eluded her 3 times before: winning the French presidency. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Shares in one of Europe's biggest airlines, EasyJet, have jumped after it agreed in principle to a new takeover offer from a US private equity group. Apollo Global Management is offering $7.7 billion for the carrier. It comes just days after the group approved a lower offer from rival US investor Castlelake. The deal values EasyJet at over $9 a share. Stock jumped 14% in early trading on the announcement. Apollo has until August the 7th to make a formal bid, which must be approved by regulators. Parts of France's Loire River have dried up, leaving stretches of sandbanks as an intense heatwave grips the country. French weather officials have placed the 9 departments in the Loire Valley and Western France under the highest red heat alert, with much of the rest of the country under orange alerts. Temperatures are expected to reach 41 degrees Celsius on Friday. The extreme conditions come just days after wildfires in southern France forced around 10,000 people to leave their homes. Still in Europe, Spain is battling multiple wildfires in its southern region, with the deadly blaze prompting an emergency response and military deployment in Almeria province. At least 11 people were killed near Bedar, some inside vehicles engulfed by flames, as 150 military emergency personnel joined firefighting efforts. Heavy smoke forced road closures while authorities raised the regional wildfire response plan to the emergency phase. Beijing has issued an orange rainstorm alert as moisture from Super Typhoon Bavi, potentially the most powerful storm to hit China in years, moves northward. The warning comes as parts of the country are still cleaning up from deadly flooding that has already claimed dozens of lives this week. Mahnur Maktoum has more from Beijing.
The Beijing Meteorological Observatory has issued an orange rainstorm alert, warning of heavy to torrential rainfall across the capital from Friday through the weekend. Authorities issued the highest level heavy rain alerts for 6 of Beijing's 16 districts. Up to 150 millimeters of rain within 6 hours in some areas is forecast. Districts including Miyun and Fangshan have shut down schools and cancelled outdoor activities, asking the public to stay indoors. Residents have been advised to avoid unnecessary travel, stay away from rivers and steep slopes, and monitor official weather updates. Bavi is forecast to make landfall on Saturday evening in Fujian province. Forecasters have warned that whichever track the storm takes after the landfall, authorities need to be especially vigilant against secondary disasters such as flash floods, mudslides, and transport disruptions. The warning comes as the death toll from devastating floods in southern China's Guangxi region rose to 39, with 9 people still missing. With Bavi now bearing down on the east coast, authorities are bracing for further severe weather across multiple regions simultaneously. China's weather warning system runs on 4 levels: blue, yellow, orange, and red. Orange indicates a serious risk requiring immediate precautionary action. Mahnur Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
At least 28 people have been killed in a fire at a shoe factory in southeastern part of China after flames spread through the building, trapping workers on the rooftop. The fire broke out at a shoe factory with 239 people inside. Officials say 213 were evacuated, 26 were found dead and 2 others died in hospital. Investigators say the blaze started on the ground floor where flammable materials and adhesives were stored. Several company officials have been detained and the factory's bank accounts frozen. Xinjiang produced more than 1.2 billion pairs of shoes in 2024, about 20% of the global output. Russia's fuel shortages are beginning to affect countries beyond its borders. Several Central Asian states that rely heavily on Russian fuel imports are already reporting supply disruptions and rising prices. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimorzina looks at how the crisis is reshaping the region's energy security.
Russia's fuel shortages are beginning to spill beyond its borders, with the first signs of disruption now emerging across Central Asia. The crisis follows Ukrainian strikes that, according to Reuters, damaged more than a quarter of Russia's oil refining capacity. In response, Moscow imposed a ban on gasoline exports and is considering similar restrictions on diesel. While those measures officially exempt members of the Eurasian Economic Union, reduced refining capacity is making it increasingly difficult for Russia to supply foreign markets. According to industry estimates, the country is now facing a fuel shortfall of at least 20,000 tons a day, raising the prospect that it may need to import fuel for the first time in decades. The impact is already visible in Kyrgyzstan, which relies on Russia for more than 90% of its gasoline imports. Some filling stations have reported shortages of premium fuel, prompting the government to seek additional supplies from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Uzbekistan has so far avoided physical shortages, but not higher prices after fuel volumes on the country's commodity exchange fell sharply. Wholesale gasoline prices climbed to record levels, raising concerns that transport and food costs could also increase. In Tajikistan, where around 84% of fuel imports come from Russia, diesel shortages have already been reported. Some filling stations suspended sales, while others introduced purchase limits at the height of the agricultural season. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan remain less exposed because of their own refining capacity. However, their ability to offset lower Russian supplies is limited. In Kazakhstan, authorities are also stepping up efforts to curb fuel smuggling across the border in order to protect domestic supplies. Analysts say the current disruption is exposing the risks of relying on a single fuel supplier. Even if Russia's fuel shortages prove temporary, they believe the crisis could accelerate efforts across Central Asia to diversify fuel imports, with China seen as one of the region's most likely long-term alternatives. Fariza Kalimorzina, Almaty, E-News.
Joining me now is Nikola Mikovic, a political analyst, joining us from Thessaloniki, Greece. Nikola, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dilek.
Now, Central Asia has relied on Russia for its fuel for years, as we saw in our story there. With Russia now having trouble keeping its own supply steady, how big of a problem is this for the region's energy supply?
At this point, it is a big problem, although I think in the long term they will manage to resolve the issue. But right now they're facing fuel shortages, and that's the result of Ukrainian actions, Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil and other energy infrastructure. As we know, over the past few weeks, Ukraine managed to destroy many oil refineries and fuel depots all over the Russian Federation. Some facilities are thousands of kilometers away from the Russian border. So now Russia is not in a position to export fuel to countries such as Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and some others. Moscow was forced to temporarily suspend exports. That does not necessarily mean that Russia will have to suspend exports of crude oil. I think Russia, for the time being, is in a position to continue exporting crude oil to countries such as India, China, and some other states, and then to import refined petroleum products. But that strategy turned the Russian Federation effectively into one of those poor African countries that do have natural resources but are forced to import fuel because they don't have their own refineries. Russia now effectively does not have many refineries left because Ukraine destroyed many of them. And all that has consequences for Central Asian states. Some of them are heavily dependent on imports of fuel from the Russian Federation. I think Kyrgyzstan is in a particularly bad position because it had a long-term contract with Russia on fuel imports, although Bishkek would prefer to import fuel from neighboring Kazakhstan, but it was unable to do that because it had contract with Moscow. But I think that the authorities in Kyrgyzstan will have to change their current political course and to import fuel from, if possible, from Kazakhstan and from other countries as well, also from China. And in the long term, Russia risks losing Central Asian market. It already lost the region politically, and now it risks losing it economically as well. And that's the result of Putin's so-called special military operation in Ukraine that's going according to plan, as we can see, although it remains to be seen whose plan it is.
And Nicola, experts argue, though, this problem goes much deeper than a short-term crisis, as you said earlier, exposing, bringing about a long-standing weakness countries have fought for years. Will this event force us to speed up efforts to find alternative energy sources?
Yes, absolutely. I think at this point, those countries in Central Asia and Mongolia as well will have a hard time finding alternative suppliers because this situation was not expected by their governments. Although it was quite clear that Ukraine was about to start striking Russian energy facilities. But nevertheless, they don't have much time, so I think they will have to speed up those efforts to find alternative suppliers. And your reporter is right that China could step in and in the long term replace Russia as a major supplier. And it's also an opportunity for other producers such as Kazakhstan and even Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan has oil refinery in Baku, so it could also begin exporting fuel to Central Asian states. Yes, I agree that it could have negative consequences, but I think only in the short term. In the long term, the market will regulate that because other producers will step in and they will effectively replace Russia as the country that has the monopoly when it comes to fuel exports to Central Asian countries. We see that Russian ally Belarus is also trying to export fuel to the region, although I think it's not quite realistic because transport has to go through the territory of the Russian Federation, and there is no guarantee that Ukraine will not strike those transports in going through Russia. But I think in the long term, Central Asian nations will resolve the issue, but Russia will not. They will find countries that are willing to supply them with fuel. But even if Russia finds countries such as Belarus and maybe even Kazakhstan or some other states that are willing, despite Western pressure, to increase their fuel supplies to the Russian Federation, again, there's no guarantee that Ukraine will not use exactly the same strategy that Russia is now using, and that's to strike gas stations in Russia. So Ukraine could do that as well. Of course, Russia has much more gas stations than Ukraine does, but nevertheless, it also has the capacity to destroy them. So Russia is facing a long-term crisis, unlike Central Asian nations that will face with, they're currently faced with difficulties and with hard time, especially when it comes to their energy needs, but I think they will manage to overcome it in the coming months.
Could fuel security become a permanent feature of national security planning?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what the conflict in the Middle East showed us. When the United States and Israel launched their military campaign against Iran, Tehran responded by striking energy facilities in neighboring Gulf states. And it didn't take much for them to start protecting their oil refineries and oil depots by building concrete walls and by placing those anti-drone nets and many other, they used many other means to protect such important facilities. And I think that will become a norm in many, if not all, countries around the world, because in the era of FPV drones, it's impossible to preserve the status quo. I think countries will need to adapt and to find ways to protect their fuel storages. Some of them will be built underground. Some of them that are on the ground will have to be protected. But it will become part of each country's strategy, energy strategy. So fuel is critically important for not only for Central Asian nations, but for all countries in the world. And I'm absolutely sure that leaders around the world will see what's going on now in Ukraine, and they will have to take steps to protect their own countries in case conflicts erupt in their regions.
Okay, Nicola, thank you so much for your analysis and time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
A renewed wave of xenophobic violence in South Africa has driven thousands of Zimbabweans back across the border. While many have reached safety, attention is shifting now to how returnees will rebuild their lives in an economy already under significant strain.
More than 77,000 Zimbabweans have returned from South Africa since the latest outbreak of xenophobic violence. Over 21,000 were repatriated by the government, while the majority made their own way home through the Beitbridge border post, where pressure to process returnees has been immense. Analysts predict the numbers of those returning will swell in coming days and could immediately reduce the amount of money sent back home and have a long-term impact on the local economy.
People now think there will be a sudden decline. It's too early to make an assessment in terms of diaspora remittances. But what will affect also both countries is now the movement of expertise, labor and labor requirements that are needed. And also the social pressures, particularly in Zimbabwe, the cost of integrating the retainees.
Zimbabwe's ability to absorb thousands of returnees will determine whether their homecoming becomes a fresh start or a temporary stop before many once again seek opportunities across the border.
Most of them have left families, they have left assets in South Africa. So I don't believe that they've got the will to remain in this country. So they are simply waiting for the situation to subside in terms of the antagonism and the anger that's in South Africa. And once the atmosphere is now settled, they will resume their trek back to South Africa. So they have the capacity to go back because they went back there without documents and they're going to go back there without documents.
Zimbabwe's government is helping returning children to enroll in school and providing other social support structures to give returning citizens a soft landing.
After the break, we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Israel's decision to recognise the events of 1915 as a genocide is drawing strong reactions from Azerbaijan, one of Israel's closest partners in the Eurasian region. The decision comes at a sensitive time for regional alliances, with Baku, Ankara and Tel Aviv all weighing its political impact.
Azerbaijan's chief Sephardic Rabbi Zamir Isayev has criticized Israel's recent recognition of the events of 1915 as so-called genocide, warning that the move risks straining relations with Baku while doing little to pressure Turkey. Rabbi Zamir Isayev said Azerbaijan was surprised by the decision, arguing that it turns a sensitive historical issue into a political tool at a time when Israel's relations with Turkey are already under severe strain.
This proposal caused deep disappointment in Azerbaijani society, especially among the Jewish people of Azerbaijan, as well as among many people in Israel society. The decision was sudden and unexpected. As far as we know and understand, there were also no talks with the Azerbaijani side before a decision was made on such a sensitive issue. I personally sent letters to the religious parties in the Knesset, and just yesterday I've received written replies from two of them. I was told that our concerns had been taken seriously, pass it on the right officials and discuss it at the high level.
Israel's cabinet backed the recognition last month, with Foreign Minister Gideon Saar saying the country had a moral and historical duty to acknowledge the event as a genocide. Azerbaijan has rejected the move, calling it a distortion of historical facts and urging Israel to reconsider. Isayev said the recognition would not meaningfully affect Turkey, but could potentially harm Israel's relationship with Azerbaijan, a key regional partner with close energy, security and military ties to the Jewish state.
Azerbaijan has always shown friendship toward Israel, despite its difficult location. At the same time, the Jewish community in Azerbaijan always enjoyed safety, freedom of religion, respect, and strong support, both the state and the society. As the Jewish community of Azerbaijan, we stand together, of course, with the state and the people of Azerbaijan on this matter. We are an important part of the Azerbaijani society, and could not stay silent about the proposals that affected the interest and the concerns of both countries.
The rabbi said he does not expect bilateral ties to suffer further unless the issue is advanced in Israel's parliament, the Knesset. He has also urged members of Israel's governing coalition to block any further declarations or legislation on the matter.
Azerbaijan and Georgia are moving ahead with a series of long-term energy agreements covering electricity, gas and transit. The latest step has now come from Baku. Nini Nikolashvili reports from Tbilisi.
President Ilham Aliyev has approved the agreement on electricity supply to Georgia and electricity transit through Georgian territory. It was originally signed on May 18th in Baku during talks between Aliyev and Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze, and is designed to remain in force for 20 years. Under the decree, Azerbaijan's energy minister will now handle implementation, while the foreign minister will notify Tbilisi once the domestic procedures required for the agreement to enter into force have been completed. The agreement was not signed in isolation. On the same day in Baku, the two countries also extended a 2-decade-old gas supply agreement by another 20 years. And signed new terms covering the Georgian section of the Baku-Supsa oil pipeline. They also agreed to restart daily passenger rail service between Tbilisi and Baku, which resumed on May 26 after a 6-year suspension. The numbers show why this matters. Azerbaijan is now Georgia's top electricity supplier. Georgia imported around $25 million worth of electricity from Azerbaijan last year, more than double the previous year's figure, out of roughly $48 million in total electricity imports. On the gas side, Azerbaijan supplies close to 85% of Georgia's natural gas, worth more than $236 million in 2025 alone. Georgian officials estimate the country depends on its neighbors for around 40% of its electricity needs on average, with that figure rising above 60% in some months, since much of Georgia's own hydropower output is seasonal. For Baku, the arrangement also secures a transit route. Azerbaijani electricity crosses Georgian territory on its way to Turkey as part of a wider energy corridor linking the Caspian region to European markets, alongside pipeline projects such as the South Caucasus Pipeline and Pakut-Pilsi-Ceyhan Pipeline. With this decree now signed, the agreement moves a step closer to entering into force, formalizing an energy relationship that both governments describe as central to regional security and connectivity. Nini Nikolaishrelit, Tbilisi, A News.
The fourth Shusha Global Media Forum, taking place on the 13th and 14th of July, will bring together media leaders from around the world to discuss the role of journalism in promoting peace and rebuilding trust. Here's the story.
Each year, media leaders, policymakers and experts come together in Shusha, a city in Azerbaijan's Karabakh region, a cultural capital, and now a platform for a global conversation on media, trust and the future. But why? Why does a media forum matter in a world that already has more information than ever? Because the real problem is no longer access, it is trust. That is the forum's purpose, to bring media voices, officials and experts together to examine how journalism responds to a changing world. One of the forum's central moments is a direct exchange with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, where participants raise questions on media freedom, regional politics and global affairs. Over 3 hours of questions and answers delivered in 4 languages.
Media representatives, they have a special responsibility.
Beyond the headlines, A News has been embedded in the forum itself, not just covering it, but contributing to its coverage on the ground. But what is waiting for us this year? To find out, we need to trace the pattern. In the first forum, the question was, how does media adapt? In the second, the conversation shifted to, who controls the truth? In the third, it became, can journalism stay credible? Growing year by year, each edition has welcomed more participants from more countries. Now comes the fourth forum. From peacebuilding and reconstruction to media diplomacy, disinformation, AI ethics and cross-border dialogue, this year's agenda points to one question. Can media rebuild trust? That is the fourth layer, the future.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he expects tangible progress in Turkey's defense ties with the United States after his meeting with President Donald Trump at this week's NATO summit. The comments come amid growing optimism that long-standing disputes over sanctions and fighter aircraft could soon be resolved. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he expects his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump to deliver concrete results for Turkey's defense industry, especially on Ankara's domestically developed Khan fighter aircraft and its ongoing bid to rejoin the U.S.-led F-35 fighter jet program. Speaking Thursday, Erdogan described his bilateral meeting with Trump during this week's NATO summit in Ankara as constructive, saying he believed the discussions would lead to a positive outcome. The meeting marked the highest level engagement between the two leaders since Trump returned to office early last year, with defense cooperation emerging as a key item on the agenda. At the summit, Trump signaled that Washington was prepared to lift sanctions imposed on Turkey's defense sector under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA. The sanctions were imposed in 2020 after Turkey acquired the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, prompting the United States to remove Ankara from the multinational F-35 program and restrict cooperation with Turkey's defense industry. Since then, Ankara has repeatedly argued that the sanctions were unjustified and has sought their removal while also calling for Turkey's readmittance to the F-35 program. Despite these obstacles, Turkey has stepped up development of its domestic defense industry, with the fifth-generation Kaan fighter jet becoming one of its flagship projects. Erdogan's latest remarks suggest that both sides may now be seeking to reset relations, especially in the defense industrial field, after several years of tension. While no formal agreements have yet been announced, both Turkish and U.S. officials have signaled a willingness to deepen cooperation, raising hopes that this week's summit in Ankara could mark a new chapter in defense ties between the two NATO allies. This is Adam Aro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.